Hi, my name's Allison Dennison. I teach Spanish 2 and 2 Advanced at Jackson High School.
And I'm Sarah Buehler. I teach Spanish 6th grade, 7th grade, Spanish 3, 4, and 5 at East Canton High School.
So you teach everything. I loved, you made this PowerPoint, especially the style. So I loved what you said about the web, because we're talking about project-based learning. And I thought you had a really good illustration before we get into the meat of it.
Okay, so I chose a spider web because for a lot of people, spiders are very scary. And I won't deny that sometimes when I come across one, I will scream and jump in the air. But spider webs are gorgeous. They are beautiful. And as you can see in this illustration, it is something that is a beautiful creative design. And when I first heard about project-based learning, it was very overwhelming and scary. But as you look at it and how the students respond to it, and you go through the process and you keep going, it just gets more and more beautiful, and you see how it actually does make a big difference in their lives.
Absolutely. And just for expectation setting, Sarah teaches in a school that they do community-wide in their school project-based learning. I teach in a school where it's limited typically just to your classroom, unless you're a part of our Academy for Global Studies. So we have two different experiences that we're bringing to the table. I will just say I'm by no means an expert. I just have some experience and have had some training in it. And Sarah, is that how you feel too? Or
Definitely.
You know more, I think.
Well,
but
we started in 2019 and then COVID hit. So we kind of had a little delay in the process, but it has been, I want to say a 3 or 4 year process that we've been going through, and each year it changes. And this year was a little overwhelming with all the new changes we've made, but we got through it. So I will share what we learned.
Yeah, and it's impressive what you guys do. So we'll go ahead and just jump into the meat of this. I think I'm up first and then Sarah. And then what we'll do after that is wrap up. So PBL, project-based learning, does have what's typically they call gold standard. And this is taken from the Buck Institute for Education, PBL Works. They are the leading experts in this field. So the learning goals are key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. So you look at these, I believe it's 7 or 8 things that you need. So you typically come up with a challenging problem or question, which in my mind, Sarah, I don't know if you feel like this, that's the hardest part, to figure out
the driving source. Yeah.
And I've been looking for this next school year. I've been looking personally at the UN Sustainable Goals, trying to see how we can kind of tie that in, since specifically we're world language. So we need to be thinking in our community, but also outside the US. But then it needs to be something that is sustained, meaning we're like, our kids can spend, depending on the project, I think my students spent about 6 weeks on theirs. Sarah, in your experience, what was it this spring? I know you had a quicker turnaround than you expected.
Yeah, we did. Last year I did 9 weeks, one each for each 9 weeks. This year I did 2 semesters. So one was a midterm exam and one was a final exam. However, in our district, we also had that education celebration in May. I think it was May 11th. So we had to have, I think it was presented at the end of March, beginning of April, and we were presenting in May. So it was pretty quick.
Yes. And then authenticity more is that they are solving like a real world problem. It's something that they can see. It's not a theoretical idea. It's not just building a model of a city or making a map of a city and writing down directions that no one's ever going to use. Student voice and choice is super important. And I think both of us would agree that's the critical piece, because what you were saying, Sarah, the spider webs are creative and beautiful. And then what kind of comes out of this is student creativity and expression and problem solving. It's amazing. So, and then obviously students reflecting on what they do, there's a critique and revision, and then finally a public product. And that can look different. Like yours was with the community, right? Most recently. And then mine was upper level Spanish students in our Model UN classes. So it's kind of whatever the project leads to. Is there anything you want to add on this slide, Sarah?
Just that it's a process. So for example, with student voice and choice, you start small and you get bigger. So this year I may only have had 2 or 3 different activities, and there was more teacher guidance, I would say, with it. But as we continue forward, we help push them a little bit more in their creativity, and hopefully they can come up with some better ideas. We were pressed for time, so I was like, these are your options. But definitely I want to grow that particular area in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's training the kids. Like, I know my students were really uncomfortable the first, I'd say, week and a half, 2 weeks. But I kept telling them, hey, this is part of the process. Because students aren't used to being given voice and choice. Yeah. So, all right, let's go to the next one. What's really good about this, and I loved, was the 21st, I'm just moving us around the screen, the 21st century skills that the students get to practice and learn. And you all know these: critical thinking, citizenship, growth mindset, which I will say was probably the hardest for my students, who were mostly freshmen and sophomores with a few juniors sprinkled in there. Communication, creativity, and collaboration. And then again, I have the student, the project-based teaching practices, the design and plan. Again, that's that driving question, which I think is hard. Aligning to standards. Do you feel like that's easier for world language teachers with our model of proficiency-based learning?
I do think so. For me in particular, the cultures goal has really driven what I wanted to do in my classroom, because I feel like that's the hardest piece to get into our classroom. The communication part's not so bad. We can find resources, we can find places to go, but getting them involved with the community, or getting them like out of our little bubble that we have at our school and into that more interaction and looking at products and practices and perspectives is more difficult. So for me, that has been my focus so far, is to kind of look at that, but it's helpful to look at the standards for that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 110%. And then managing activities, that's kind of the day-to-day, what's happening in the classroom. I know I had a schedule. I checked in with students regularly. It didn't stop all problems, but it helped. Any thoughts on that?
Well, like I said, this happened in April this year, which is when we do state testing. And so therefore, there were a lot of, some people are here, some people are not here. And then sports got into the thing. And, it's just one of those things where you try to plan the best and then you be adaptable and flexible.
Exactly. And I thought scaffolding was easier with this in a lot of ways, because you can work one-on-one. Assessing student learning, it's kind of what we do with our proficiency rubrics and everything that we have. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Okay.
And it's kind of nice actually, because they get some one-on-one or like team-on-one communication, which didn't really happen a lot in other parts of the lesson. So
yeah, and I kind of prefer that, because then you get into that engaging and coaching and you're building relationships. I really loved it, even though it was uncomfortable. So do you have anything to add before we advance the slide? All right,
that's good.
So I'll move our little faces again. How does this work in a world language classroom? We did kind of already touch on it. We want our students to have language proficiency and interculturality. And when the kids are doing this project-based learning, looking up the information, and I'll tell you, my kids, because they were Spanish 2, advanced Spanish 2, but still Spanish 2, I told them, go ahead. If you find resources in English, please use them, because we then together will learn how to kind of simplify it and put it in language that you can express. And I kept reminding them over and over, which I know you do, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for proficiency. Can a native speaker understand you? And I had to keep stressing that to the kids, that, hey, you are not going to write your pamphlet or your speech, whatever their product was, in the same level that you speak and write in English as a sophomore in high school. You're going to write it for like a first, second grade level. And that's okay to simplify the language, because that's what they're capable of.
And you also have to look at your audience. For ours, it was
Yes.
East Canton community who was looking at our products. So were all of our products in Spanish? No, because
No.
then they
Yeah.
would not have understood what it was. They would have just walked right on by the table. But we used a lot of language while we were creating our products and while we were investigating things and looking at videos. We did have a one commercial that was in Spanish, which was our upper level class, and it was great. But we had English subtitles and we used a ton of cognates because we knew that our audience was not going to understand, but they wanted to do it in Spanish. And they said, can we? And I was like, absolutely, 100%. Yes.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah.
hearing that they did that. It's really neat. Yeah, I just love it. And honestly, for my kids, talking to Spanish 4, 5, and maybe there was a Spanish 6 student in there, they still need fairly simple
Yes.
speech and reading. So it's good. It's good. I love it. And cross content research. I know my students, some were looking at food and nutrition. Some looked at language, how language is used, written. Some it was on dress and materials used. So again, they're not just focused on grammar. They're not just focused on history or literature. It's a whole wide swath. And it sounds like you guys were like that too.
Yeah, I'll get into more details later. But
I know. We're trying to. And what was fun, I think my students liked, but was hard, was the collaboration, investigating, and creating their own project. I think students, and it's student directed, they want us to give them the checklist and they go through and they're not thinking creatively. They're not thinking critically. And that's the part students can struggle with. Do you find that to be okay?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I had to give them some ideas this year, just because we were pressed for time. I'm like, okay, here's like 10 things, pick one, you know.
And they're tired in April and May. Yeah. They're tired. We're tired.
Yeah.
So Sarah, you found this, I think.
I did.
One of us, you did. Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
So you want to talk about this?
Yeah, this was just something I found while I was doing some research for our World Lead Teacher meeting when we first presented this. Mm-hmm. But basically, obviously, we love projects. We love looking at what kids can create. We love displaying them. But are projects necessarily project-based learning? So this is where we're looking at a project could be done by themselves. And I had some students ask me this year, can I just do my own? And I'm like, no, you can't. Mm-hmm. You have to be working with other people and go through it. And usually with projects, it's the end product. Like we're evaluating, you know, the summative, what happened, and the project base is more informative about the process and how we're going through. We have an end goal in mind. It's very teacher directed with projects, but with project-based learning, it's more student directed. Yes, we do have an idea of what we want them to accomplish, but really they're free to go in their own direction to do that. There can be sometimes a real world context, but usually it's more like a school-based context. Mm-hmm. And like she said before, real world experiences or problems are the issues with project-based learning. And then sometimes projects are like, okay, we learned all this stuff, now do a project based on what we've learned. Whereas in project-based learning, you're learning as you go through the steps. So you didn't do a unit and then you're doing this. This is like an ongoing thing that happens while you're doing other things on the side almost. And then all projects have the same goal. Usually you have a rubric and you check off all the things that they did. Whereas in project-based learning, it's more how they present it and then how they reflect on what they learned.
Yep. Well done, Sarah. Hopefully we're not boring anybody reading the slides. Yeah. All right. So these are links and this should be provided to everyone who's participating in the conference. So you should be able to have this slideshow. There is a website, PBL in the TL, so it's project-based learning in the target language. She actually goes and does projects, and then she rates how she does. And some are that concept when I was in training with the Buck Institute, like sunset PBLs, because it's not realistic to always hit those gold standards constantly. But to get you used to it, to get the students used to the idea, some are a little project-ish, but not, they kind of cross. And I think the freedom for us as world language teachers is to say, hey, it's okay. We're learning, they're still going through the process. Then we have PBL Works. That's the Buck Institute of Education. Then here are project ideas based on a proficiency level. This is a PDF that I got from ODE when I did their training on project-based learning, but PBLL, project-based language learning. They changed it. And then finally, here is what's called Pebbles. There is the training that Ohio Department of Education did in PBLL was, sorry, all the acronyms, sometimes I forget what they even mean, but this training is taken from the National Foreign Language Resource Center, and it's out of the University of Hawaii. These have tons of projects on there, and it's helpful to look at and see how people have done projects in the past, and even based on the location where they're living, how they can help their communities. So I highly recommend checking out all of these, as they're very helpful as you're just kind of learning about it. And I will put in a plug. I know Kathleen Shelton she will be doing, making available on ODE's website in the learning management system. Any teacher can do this course that I did. I was part of the pilot group, and we encouraged her at our last meeting maybe to have cohorts with an opportunity to meet like we did, or it can be self-directed. So if you're like me and you tend to just delete emails or ignore emails from ODE, because we get a lot, open them, because she's going to be sending out information later in the summer about it, and possibly even panel discussions, kind of like what we're doing right now, Sarah. So there's my plug for ODE. So when I did specifically with ODE was this project-based language learning. So the big thing that you have to do, and in my talks, obviously with ODE, but then with colleagues who do project-based learning regularly, is that the entry event is the most important thing that you do. And the links are here for you to view, but in the interest of time, we're not probably going to click on all our links. But the biggest thing is it needs to hook the kids, excite the kids, and get them thinking and buying in. So my driving question was very broad. In fact, my principal and I worked together on this as well, was how do you preserve Indigenous dress, language, food, culture in an increasingly globalized world? That it was very broad, because then the kids had a lot to choose from. However, I will say that had its own struggles. So when I first started with my students, I did stop and I kind of asked them what makes up culture, what is important in your family and maybe your family's heritage, really kind of getting them thinking and defining that. And then I had a variety of videos. So one that really hit home with the kids was the last native speaker of the Yagan language passed away, actually, I think it was in February, maybe late January. And the students saw interviews with her and videos of where she grew up in southern Argentina, and learned how she was the last of her people. There were pictures of her growing up. And the students were surprisingly very moved by this. We also watched some videos about Native dancing, Native Indigenous dancing. And, you know, some of my Greek students could relate to that, because we do have a large, in this area, Greek population, where they have dances, and Greek Fest is going to start here pretty soon in Canton. That was really helpful to my students and kind of got them excited and interested in doing this. So the key was to move them first and foremost and get them interested. Then it was presenting the assignment, and even then presenting the driving question, getting that buy-in. And I will say my principal encouraged me that I should have had a longer entry event. He said I could have done it for 2 days, even 3 days. But this being a remediation year again from COVID, and kids coming in to my classes that hadn't sat in a Spanish class in over a year, I didn't feel like I had that time. However, that was freeing, that, okay, maybe I can guide the students more. And that's where, don't you think, Sarah, that entry event is where a lot of the kind of guiding and you're shaping their thinking before they even know what's happening, in a very good non-brainwash way.
Oh, I think so, because they need something to go off of. You can't just like throw a question up on the board and then expect them to be able to do anything with it. Plus, I think that's where they see your passion. That's where they see that you care about what's going on in the world, especially these cultural questions. And I think they're willing to kind of like go with you on that journey. And then they end up having a little bit more passion for it themselves than they thought they would. In fact, when I looked at my self-reflections after the education celebration, the question that I found the most interesting was, what did you learn? And a lot of them talked about things I would never expect them to have said before we did that project. So I think it kind of definitely helped them to start thinking about things. And part of that was how we presented it and how we got into it and how we started talking about it.
Absolutely. And just what the students, their focus shifted from just memorizing grammar formulations or memorizing vocab and then forgetting it and then being frustrated when it always comes back, because we're always recycling, to how can I use what I already know to express what I'm excited to tell other people about. And it was very empowering. I am actually going to click on this link just to show everyone what my assignment looks like. And there are definitely things I would change, but I gave basic requirements for them. But what I think was really helpful to the kids was this section here. The link prior to project ideas that is on the slide. Actually, this is where I pulled a lot because they're divided by proficiency level. So I knew in my class, there were some kids more at a novice high, some at intermediate low. So I could give them just ideas, and then they were able to choose what they wanted and run with it. And then of course I gave the oral project information, mechanics, and I did give them a possible people group list. This UNESCO heritage list is very helpful. And I kept it basic. Their rubrics were all on, oh, how do I get to my other screen? I apologize. It's white. Oh, good. Okay. They always want a little more specific help and clarity. So I think that helps them out a little bit to have. And do you have any thoughts, Sarah, before I go to my student results?
No, I mean, that's what I did too. I gave them possibilities. A lot of them chose to do the same thing this year, but I think in the end, it was actually good because they learned a lot in that process as well.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about my project as I go through the student results. These are student surveys that ODE wrote. So I did not come up with these questions, but I liked how they were worded. So let me show you. 50% of my students said that this was a more enjoyable unit. So that made me very happy. Like, not everyone's going to like what we do. However, that tells me they were much more engaged in the process of what they were doing. While it was messy and frustrating at times for the kids, they were engaged, which means we all know when they're engaged, then they're learning. And I do think I did mine. I started in late February through March. Actually, I think I started early February through March. And that's when they kind of get sick of school and they just want spring break and they want to be done. So I was pleased that they enjoyed it, because sometimes I didn't know if they were enjoying it. Now, 46.7% agreed that they spoke more Spanish, and 33% said that they spoke, somewhat agreed that they spoke more Spanish. This was what excited me, because I did hear English, of course, because they're Spanish too, and they're reading in English. However, one of the best parts of this project were kids had to come and talk with me. They had questions about, one group in particular was wanting to say something in the past tense, and they had not learned in Spanish the imperfect tense in the past tense. And a kid figured it out on his own. Like, Sarah, you use word reference, I like Spanish dictionary, kind of the same thing. But in his investigation, in how do I present this and what language do I use, he saw patterns emerging and he could do it. And that was very powerful. Not to mention then the vocabulary. They're looking up the words they need in addition to words they already know, especially when it came to clothing for my students. They were excited to use them, and they felt empowered in what they could do and what they were able to do, and what they could show the world. So I thought this honestly made everything worth it to me. So Sarah, do you feel like you've seen something similar with your kids?
Definitely for the group who chose to do the commercial, definitely, because they would come and maybe ask me, does this look okay? Or how do you pronounce this word? But for the most part, they kind of took it and ran with it. And even there were a couple of kids, because we were cross-curricular, who were in the other class where they were filming it, who weren't in a Spanish class, and they still made them speak Spanish. So they were like teaching them how to say the words. And I was impressed with that. Like, they didn't say, oh, is this okay? They just said, no, you're doing this. This is how you say it. So I think they got a lot out of doing that experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. And I think the key here, guys, is that it's student voice and choice. So we're not the ones saying, here's your list of vocabulary that you're going to use. Here are the activities that we're doing with it. Okay, now here's the grammar. Use that to practice the vocab and grammar together. Then I'm giving you a test. The kids take the skills they know, the skills they have in Spanish, they use them and then add to it what they need and what they want to know about. And then they have this summative project at the end. So what it is doing is it's empowering the students to take responsibility for their own learning and to go with it. And I'm amazed at how much they remembered, how excited they were. And again, for me, how much Spanish they thought they learned. Honestly, I thought they would have said less. Had I filled this out for them, I would have been like, strongly disagree. But I was excited. So let's head on to the next slide here. 66% agreed that their speaking and writing abilities increased. Enough said. It kind of goes along with everything we did. And again, to me, these more concrete results, now, yes, it's subjective student perception, but these concrete results, I think, really speak for themselves, because again, these are the kids we're educating. And I think as world language teachers, we like to be in control, and we like to tell people what the results need to be. But again, this gives the students quite a strong sense of self-efficacy, which will benefit them next year as they go on. And 83% agreed that their understanding of Spanish-speaking countries increased. There's our cultural target goal right there. And that thrilled me to help the kids think outside of their Stark County bubble, which is it's a great place to live, but the world is so much bigger than what we have here in Stark County, let alone Northeast Ohio. And Sarah, you and I can talk about our time living overseas in Spanish-speaking countries, about our travels till we're blue in the face. But until they want to know something and they're interested in it, I just don't think it's going to have the impact that this will. Do you have anything you want to add about that?
I would agree. Like I said, in that self-reflections that they wrote in their Google Forms, they were, what they were talking about, what they had learned from it. It wasn't, oh, I learned about, Panama
Yeah.
and the capital and whatever. It was like, I learned that it's important to use ecotourism wisely and that there are different options when you're traveling and things like that. And it was like, they never would have said that if we hadn't done this.
I know.
So,
And we can tell them that, but unless
yeah.
they seek it out, they're not going to know. So, and then actually, again, this surprised me based on some of the complaints, and a couple groups had some partner difficulties that going forward, I would maybe ask different questions with the check-ins, but 46% prefer the way that this unit was taught, and 23% somewhat agree that they preferred it. And again, you don't have to do this every 9 weeks. If you do it once first semester, once second semester, once a year, I think it again helps those students that want to be more in control, so to speak, of their own learning. All right, Sarah, now this is all you. Just tell me when to advance the slides and I'll do it.
Okay. Well, originally we had been asked to present this at a World Lead teacher meeting, and our leader Dana had asked us to look at IPAs versus PBL. So that's how I started this out. And it's basically what I talked about before, those projects or those IPAs. You give them tasks to do, you figure everything out, you have your rubrics, and it's usually summative at the end of a unit or at the end of a semester or something. And that's pretty much what we do. But the PBL is different. It's formative. It's a process that we go through. And there are project-based learning and problem-based learning, very little differences between the two of those. But the idea is that you're presenting what you learned instead of fulfilling a task. So if you go on to the next one. This is just a little bit more into the difference between project-based learning versus problem-based learning. We kind of do a mixture of both here at East Canton. Project-based learning is where there's a problem with multiple solutions and you're trying to design a product to come up with a solution. However, problem-based learning is more, there's a problem that doesn't really have a good solution to it, and you're looking for a solution. That's definitely very higher level thinking. You have to be very careful with that due to what's going on. So one of the things that we did is we look at an open-ended question or task in either way. And then we're trying to make sure that each of us have content or skills that apply to that. For our school, we do a lot of cross-curricular. So we have multiple classes looking at the same problem, trying to figure out their take on what's going on based upon their standards and what they're doing. It has to involve technology with those 21st century success skills and helping them just to be more independent, working together, and more multifaceted, but there are slight differences which you can see in there. Project-based learning can take a long time. Like I said, it took almost a semester to do. The project or the problem-based ones can be a little bit shorter. And then you can read through the rest of that. So we'll move on. Okay, so project-based learning, it's very complicated.
But worth it. But
it is worth it, yes. So this started back in 2019. We were all told we had to start doing this. And part of that is because East Canton is the only public high school in Stark County that has a STEM designation. And part of that STEM designation comes from doing PBL. So our STEM program started the whole process, and then it's kind of like expanding into the school like a spider web. And we're having to get with the program. So we started just in our own classrooms, and then COVID hit, and it was like, okay, I want to keep going with this because I knew it was going to come back. And so I started expanding a little bit. And one of the ways I did that was by looking at the middle school elective programs. So I teach Spanish, but I'm very close with the music teachers and the art teacher. And we decided as a school that we did not want to just teach Spanish vocab and grammar in our elective classes. We wanted it to be more culturally based to get them excited about the program, still introduce them to, songs and basics, but for the most part, cover culture. So that's really fun for me to do. I love doing that. I played flute, I drew and painted when I was in school. So I love incorporating everything that I can into it. And it really shows how excited I am about the language. So one of the things that I started doing is a Spanish art unit, and it includes artists from Spain, but also from Latin America. And so I started finding ideas and projects for them to do. And our school always has an art show. And we do it down in the community center. And she likes to have at least one piece of art from each student involved with it, which for a school our size is a lot of art. But I told her some of the ideas I was doing, and she's like, well, we're not doing that in art class, but that's really cool. Can you incorporate that into the art show? So there was a little bit of collaboration there, in that I could go ahead and have my kids present their art projects at her art show. So that was one way of doing that, but it was kind of like each kid had their own take of how they wanted to do the different art. So for example, a Picasso face, if I give you a little bit of instruction and we look at stuff, who knows what they could come up with, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different varieties of things and different colors and different things like that. We also looked at like geckos from Barcelona and like going into that. So again, designs and colors. So we looked at that. Next year, I'd like them to create more, 3D models instead of just other stuff. Yeah. We also looked at La Lucha Libre, designing your own masks, like what could you do and why would you pick that? And some people went East Canton, some people went traditional sports, some people designed their own thing. I'm trying to think what else I had. My favorite one, I found a way to create your own alebrije using traditional Mexican animals. So they learned how to do they researched some Mexican animals, and then they picked parts and pieces from different animals, and they created their own alebrijes.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
That was really cool. So we just basically displayed that, and that was an example of us coordinating together, but the students were able to create their own pieces. For my Spanish 3 classes, I started out with Hispanic heritage, looking at the products and practices and perspectives that go into Day of the Dead, and with Hispanic Heritage Month, because a lot of our school doesn't do anything for Hispanic Heritage Month. So, but the cool thing is, and we're in a K through 12 building. So I wanted some groups to work with the elementary, some groups to work with the middle school, some groups to work with the high school. And I said, how are you going to get it out there? How are you, but not just make a poster. I said, I want those kids in each group to interact with whatever the information is. So they had to find ways to help them to learn it, not just by seeing a presentation, but actually doing it. And then we took those people and then we made Day of the Dead displays for them.
Oh, that's neat.
Yes. So they learned about, they had to do all the research on Day of the Dead. I didn't give them anything. They had to do their own research on the people, and then they had to figure out a way to interact with the different people and then put that out there. So
what was the driving question with that? Or was that
if you click on that link that says Hispanic Heritage, the questions at the top of
that might be helpful just for somebody to see. There you go.
So I have my cultures goal there, but my question is, how can we as Spanish 3 students spread Hispanic Heritage Month awareness and incorporate it into the Day of the Dead displays throughout Osnaburg local school districts in order to promote Hispanic intercultural interaction?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
That was really good.
And hey, the noise is okay. You're at school.
Okay.
A bunch of teachers were we get it.
Yeah. And then for our final exam, it kind of changed over the year because it started out, you can go ahead and click on it.
Okay.
It started out as a travel thing. Yes.
Okay.
I want to promote travel in our district. We're very much trying to build a culture of travel and worldview. And so I said, how can we as Spanish 3 students encourage exploration of Hispanic destinations throughout the Osnaburg local school district in order to promote future Hispanic travel opportunities with Hispanic intercultural interaction, which sounds like a mouthful. But basically, our easiest way to interact with others from other cultures is to travel to those other countries. So I want everybody from elementary, middle school, high school to get excited about the idea of traveling, whether it's through EF tours, which is what we're using right now, or just like on their own on summer vacations or whatever. But I also wanted them to promote, why are we traveling to Hispanic countries? Like, what are good reasons to travel to Hispanic countries? So that's how I started it out. However, that morphed into ecotourism.
Yeah.
Because our junior project that we had to do this year had to do with creating an environmentally sustainable business. So,
oh, wow, that's neat.
yes. So what we ended up doing in our Spanish class, and actually with the environmental class as well, is creating a Hornet travel agency. And what we were doing in that case then is we were trying to go ahead and basically put in the Hispanic destinations we were looking at, but also we were wanting to look at, when you get there, what do you do as an American tourist in a country? Are there choices you can make? And so we were looking at 4 main areas: food, like food choices, whether it's street food or restaurants. We looked at lodging, like, is it the most ecological thing to go to a hotel? Are there better options? We looked at activities you can do as a tourist. Maybe some things are not as better as others. And then we also looked at transportation. So they actually learned a lot more than I initially wanted them to because of the way, but I thought I can incorporate this in, we can make it work.
Well,
So
and think of all the vocab they learned that they had
Yes.
to know, and they probably wanted to know. I mean, that's amazing, Sarah.
yeah,
Yay!
so
Okay.
it was huge. Yeah, so if we go back,
Okay.
basically each of these projects has 2 parts, right? So there's a part 1 and a part 2. The part 1, you have to create the interaction with the focus groups. You have to get feedback from them. You have to reflect on that. And then you don't just let it go. You have to get it back out there again. So there's a part 2 that comes into play where you're promoting what you just taught them, because as we know, people need to hear things over and over and over again. So that's why I need a whole semester, because there's a part 1, there's a creative part, and then you take your feedback and then you reflect on it, and then you create something else, a public product that goes back out there, and then you have to reflect on that after it's done. So it's a very involved process. I don't do it like for a week or 2 at a time. I do like 1 or 2 days a week over,
That's what I
dipping in.
did. And I thought that was better because the kids, it was less overwhelming. And it helped teach self-regulation.
Right.
And my kids,
and you never know when someone's going to be out or something else is going to happen. So then you're like, that's okay. We're working on this part for this number of weeks. So you can catch up. You can, do that kind of thing. The other 2 I have mentioned there, you can look on your own, but those are just fun, like those were my first projects I did. The first one's just a game PBL. Like, it was something along the lines of, I had a hook letter with a college, our CCP coordinator, saying, we're noticing there's a problem with people having issues with this grammar concept when they come to CCP or when they come into the whatever. What have you learned? Can you design something that will help the younger kids to understand it better? And I had all kinds of stuff for that. So they had to either look up traditional Hispanic games, or they could take a game from America and change it to make it their own. And then we had choose your own adventure. It was all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the chop thing, my kids love.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work. Oh my goodness. So the idea is they have to research a Hispanic country and come up with an entree, an appetizer, and a dessert. I'm not giving them a basket with 3 random ingredients to make something with, but they do it as a competition. So they are looking at I need to plate it attractively. It needs to look nice. I have to find these ingredients. Where am I going to get them from? They have to use authentic Hispanic recipes. So they have to learn about the grams versus the cups and all that kind of thing. And then they have to say, well, was this the best appetizer? Should we get a different one? Like, would we like this? You know?
Yeah.
So, and then like we have to vote. And I said, you can't vote just for your own. You have to look at how does it taste? How does it look? That kind of thing. Why are these ingredients being used in these countries and that kind of thing? But they love doing it. And last year, my Spanish 4s complained so much that they didn't get to do it because the Spanish 3s did it. And they thought it was so unfair that we did it between our 2 CCP semesters this year. And then at the end of the year, they're like, can we cook again? And I'm like, okay, I am so tired. Let's just do a quesadilla bar. And but they made them. They made the quesadillas. I did not do it because they're really into cooking now. So I think teaching those world skills, but also introducing them to other flavors. Some of them had never had a mango before. Some of them had never, you know what I mean? Like just those flavors and the different things. It's a life skill, but it's also an experience with their mouth that they're going to remember doing. And it's going to be like, I remember I cooked in Spanish 3 or 4 or whatever. Because people don't always do that unless they're really into it. So
right, absolutely.
Anyway, moving on. I'm sorry, I'm getting all excited about it.
I know, so, I love it.
In Osnaburg, it has to be cross-curricular. So in our case, it's like the whole freshman class, the whole sophomore class, the whole junior class, the whole senior class. So any of the classes those kids are in, they're working on this PBL together. It has to integrate technology, be hands-on and engaging, connected to grade level standards. They have to think critically, student choice and differentiation. They have to be able to present a final product. It does not have to be like you said, a model. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. Next year, we get the joy of including a community partner.
And wouldn't you say that's the hardest part? Like I wanted to have a community partner for ours. Where do you go for a Spanish speaking community partner here in Starr County? So I mean there are places,
there are,
but that's the tricky piece.
I have a feeling I am going to be contacting Dana next year to get some ideas for that.
Yes,
and then absolutely. Of course we have our education celebration. So
which do you have photos of that next, right?
Yes, soon.
Almost. Okay. Yeah.
So we have our hook event, which in this year it was all a letter, just because of what was going on. Each of the letters was different, and I'll get into that in a second. Then we have a discussion with our students where we have a chart. What do we need to know? And what do we know from this letter? And then from that, you're supposed to get your task statement, which you have an idea in your mind of what that question is going to be, but you make it where they come up with it. So like you do have some idea of where we're going, but then you're trying to pull it out of them so they feel like it. And in fact, it's really funny because some of my students this year were like, can you believe that art letter we did 2 or 3 years ago was not real? Like they were still upset about it because they were like designing a logo for something for art. And they're like, I can't believe they lied to us about it. It was hilarious. But anyway, they really get into it. And then they have to start gathering information, and then they have ideas. And I've had students say, oh, I'm going to do this. And then they're like, I don't know, this isn't working. I'm like, then change it. Nothing's holding you to what you're doing. You can change it up.
Absolutely.
And then of course, the most important part is sharing that out to the other people. So for the freshmen, they did a Cold War thing. So everybody was focused on some aspect of the Cold War. I believe the Spanish 1 class was looking at Cuba.
Probably.
Some other things. Yeah. I wasn't part of that process. So resiliency as well. I honestly don't remember.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
For us, I said it was the environmental sustainability business. So we have the ecotourism travel agency. You do not have to click on it, but it will show through. Here was the letter, and then we had the need to know chart, and then we had the driving question, and then we had their tasks. So
that reminds me, your need to knows. I had 2 of those craft paper thing, big pieces with my students, and I had skills and skills on one, and I think it was knowledge or need to knows on another. And the students wrote on Post-it notes.
Okay.
And we hung that up in the classroom. So then throughout the project, I could refer back when I was checking in with them. Do you have this? Do you know how to do this? How can I help you? And then they could refer back to it. And it kind of helped keep us on track. And it was a good visual for all of us to kind of make sure we're getting the elements done. And it was big. So we couldn't forget about them, even if we wanted to. Sorry, I thought you just think of that.
And then for Spanish 5, we had a very limited window because they were, due to various circumstances, 7 snow days this year, all kinds of stuff. We had a very small window with the CCP. So they had like 3 days. I mean, it was very difficult to fit them in this year, but I promised Mrs. Gothard I would do it. So we did. So they focused on healthcare because I believe the English class was working on reading a book about a man who had cancer and how he was approaching that. So we thought about, well, what about bilingual healthcare? What do doctors do who don't speak Spanish? What do patients do if they speak Spanish and they walk into a emergency room or a clinic or whatever? If it's how does communication happen? What skills do you need to be in the healthcare field for that? So they came up with a PowerPoint because we have limited time.
Yeah.
But each kid picked a topic for their slide. They figured it out. I did not. I did do some research for them once I knew what their topics were, like just, okay, this is where you can go to this. But we had everything from like counseling to what are state laws in Ohio for insurance, for providing bilingual things. We looked at education you need to get into. We looked at what universities provide for medical health care. So like University of Akron has some classes, Kent State has some classes you can take to do medical Spanish. So they learned a lot in a very short period of time. I'm hoping to maybe expand that a little bit next year. And maybe it's not so healthcare, but maybe it's more life skills. Like how can we use Spanish? Not just, you need Spanish to have a career, but like how can Spanish be incorporated into life skills, whether it's cooking or healthcare or whatever field that you're going into, kind of expanding, maybe not me telling you this is why you need to learn Spanish, but them exploring why and how the world around us has Spanish in it. And they need to figure out how that works. So we'll kind of see.
I love that you're doing that because my undergrad is in Spanish and I spoke Spanish in business every day, all day, until I did stay home with my children for a time. And that's when that phase of my life ended. But I never would have thought of that. And when I tell my students, they're like, what? In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that's where we're living. You did that? And I'm like, yeah. And I got paid better. So yeah, you need to go. We'll finish this here. Here we go. Sorry. There's pictures real quick.
So these are pictures from the education celebration. Just to let you know, this is my son, Ryan. So I knew I could use that picture.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's a cutie.
He had 2 projects actually to do as a 5th grader, because this was pre-K through 12 in our gym. So the project he has here that he's working on was state testing. Is it good? Is it effective? How does it work? So they had to do a ton of research on state testing, and he's in 5th grade. Wow. And then he had to create a trifold. He had to have his, works cited. He had to do all this stuff that you would expect like this project to be something at a high school level, but his 5th grade teacher wanted to really push those kids. So that's one project he did. This other project he did was to create a homemade musical instrument. And it wasn't just like get a Kleenex box and put some rubber bands on it. Like we actually had to look at, okay, how are we going to make 3 different drum sounds using Pringle cans? Oh my gosh. We had to look at the size of it. We had to look, was it covered? Was it not covered? How am I going to make a cymbal that makes like a metallic, sound? And so that's a coffee cup thing. And then how am I going to hold it up there? So then we had to look at, putting the dowels in and all that. So
Uh,
these are homemade drumsticks. You know what I mean? Like we had to actually like create everything.
That's
And then he
neat.
had to talk about that process. This picture looks like chaos, but the reason why I have it is because this was one of my students here. He has his own business of selling food,
Oh,
like
neat.
treats, like cupcakes. So the school actually paid him to offer treats at this thing, and then he was trying to grow his business while he was there.
Wow, that's
This
great.
this student here, they created a 3D thing in their STEM class of their STEM lab, and they had this little machine that did different things. So they were other students of mine. He was involved in the Stark Tank
Oh, yeah.
process, and he ended up winning one of the prizes for that. So that was a process there. And then this is another student doing a science project they did. Our choir, our Echoes show choir, was singing songs from In the Heights during the whole thing. They were performing, they were singing. Some of it was in English, some of it was in Spanish.
Oh, that's
So
great.
we had that thing going. We had STEM projects. This was one of my group of kids who did it's in English because it was an
Yeah,
English community.
Yeah.
But again, you can see it was lodging and transportation and all the different things. And then this was part of the art show. So, I mean, it was just a crazy night of 2 hours of people just wandering through the gym, and the students had to man their stations and explain what they did and everything. And we sort of had it grouped by grade. So
Mhm.
like if you went to the Cold War section, all of the classes in that area
Oh,
would be
that's
there
nice.
and all that kind of thing. So it was a fun night, but I just to show you some variety of what was
Yes.
going on.
I know, because we have to think outside the box. For me, that's
Yes.
it can be the hardest thing, which is why
Yeah.
I'm already working on next year now.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's a wrap, Sarah. Our emails are here, guys. If you have any questions, we hope you found this useful. Any final words, friend?
Have fun, explore
Yes.
something new, and if it doesn't work exactly the way you expected it to, that's okay. It's a learning process, and every year it gets better.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I felt uncomfortable the whole way through it when I was doing that. But at the end, seeing the products that my students created, the newscasts, the slideshows, the books, I had students write graphic novels, record them, draw everything themselves. It was worth it. It was worth feeling uncomfortable. So
I've had students make books too, and then you can record over them, and
yes,
then we
yes.
shared those with the elementary. It's
Yeah,
fun.
it was
Yeah.
amazing. It was amazing. So we hope you enjoyed this. Reach out if you have any questions. Bye.